and welcome back to the Pennsylvania Literary Festival here at the Uniontown Mall in Fayette County, May 31st. We also are going to be here tomorrow, June 1st. Lots of activities. We should note that today was actually made the reading day here in Fayette County, thanks to the festival. We're going to start with a panel on feminism in writing. And I'm going to let each of the panelists give you a little introduction of themselves. And we'll start down here with J.L. Gribble.
Hi, my name is J.L. Gribble. I'm actually a professional medical editor. And on the side, I do freelance fiction editing in all genres. And I also do a little bit of writing in the science fiction and fantasy genres.
Hi, I'm Ann Kopchik. I write fantasy as Ann Kopchik. As Anna Szabo, I write romance. And that's pretty much it. I'm one of the Seton Hill graduates, too.
And Carole Waterhouse.
Hi, I'm Carole Waterhouse. I'm a creative writing professor at California University of Pennsylvania, and I've worked with the Pennsylvania Humanities Council on a program called Detecting Women, which takes a look at the way that women are portrayed in genre fiction.
And K.W. Taylor.
Hi, I'm K.W. Taylor. I'm the author of The Red Eye, an urban fantasy novel, and I also teach English and women's studies.
Okay, wonderful. So we have a very varied panel here. And one of the questions that everyone asks whenever they deal with feminism is, what exactly is your personal definition of feminism? Do one of you want to take that one first? That's a tough one, I know.
So my definition of feminism is the crazy notion that women are human. And that's how I approach writing female characters and reading them, in fact. And I'm also a big fan of the Bechdel test in both fiction and film and pretty much all media, which is if a work passes the Bechdel test, it has one significant female character who talks to another female character about something other than men.
Ah, interesting. Anyone want to add to that?
I'm very similar in that my personal definition of feminism is, women are people. They're not any different. They shouldn't be treated any differently than men in fiction. They should have their own agency, their own wishes, their own dreams, and it doesn't necessarily have to revolve around a male point of view.
Okay. Anything from either? We think they've pretty much covered it.
I agree very much with what they've said, so I
I
take the easy way out.
I would kind of like to add something that I think that men can absolutely be feminists, and that one problem that I think men have who identify as trying to fight for women's equality, they think that the word feminism excludes them, and it absolutely does not. So.
Very nice. Make sure that we understand that it's not exclusionary in that regard. Now, each of you have in one form or another addressed something from your feminist values within the work that you've done. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, one thing that I don't shy away from is writing from lots of different perspectives. So this book I actually wrote from a first-person male protagonist standpoint as almost an assertion that women can write from that perspective, which I actually think is a feminist act, even if this doesn't have a central female character so much. So to me, it's not just about having feminist themes in your work, it's also about writing in a feminist way.
Interesting. Anne, how about you?
Very similarly, writing from a male point of view, I think, is as a woman, is a very interesting way to approach feminism. But also, when writing from a female point of view, I have some novels with female point of views. I actually had a hard time writing from a woman's point of view when I was first starting to write, because I was so used to reading male points of view in the fiction I was reading. All the science fiction, the fantasy, I tended to read more the male point of view. So trying to write in the female point of view and just treat them like people was a challenge, even as a woman, even though I am a woman. Writing from that aspect was very challenging, and it basically I had to stop and say, this is someone just like me. I should write them with the same agency that I have, with the same perspective that I have, and not particularly worry about whether they're male or female.
Carole, did you have the same issues whenever you were writing? Or was your protagonist from female or male perspective in your novel?
It's interesting. When I was an undergraduate and first started writing, I always wrote from a male perspective. And I actually had a creative writing professor pull me into his office and say, why don't you write about what women do? That's interesting. And I rejected doing that. I thought, no, men's lives are far more interesting than women's, and I wanted to write only about theirs. Obviously, I've changed about that substantially. But I've often found sometimes that when I write with female characters, they're still judged sometimes from a male perspective, and I find that very frustrating. I've also found sometimes that there's a tendency to either want to encourage writers to write about women who are extremely heroic, or women who are victimized in one way or another. And I find a lot of trouble finding that middle ground, and with characters that are accepted, that may be female, but may be flawed, but are still understood. They have to be sort of one extreme or the other.
JL.
So I'm going to bring up actually a slightly different perspective on the editorial side as opposed to the author side. When I was working on this anthology, I was approached to help with this anthology because the previous ones in the series, they'd gotten some pushback about not having enough female participation. So they said, okay, well, we'll find a female editor, who then went out and found some female authors. And what's interesting is that there's 4 female authors in this anthology, and they all wrote male main characters, and Heidi included. And it's actually all of the female main characters in this anthology were written by male authors. So there is actually female participation, and then they all wrote guys.
It's interesting because, yes, as you were saying that, I started to think my story in there is from the male perspective. I have a tendency to write, as some of you do, in multiple POVs. So I end up getting that ensemble cast, but I can remember telling people in the beginning when I was first starting to write science fiction that I tried to write like a man, so I would be taken seriously in a very male-dominated field. And I even had a college professor, Mike Lawrenson from Seton Hill, after we had a workshop experience, and he looked at me and he said, "You write like a man." And I thought that was a great compliment whenever he told me that at first. And then I realized that when people would look at some of my female characters, they were paling in comparison to my male characters. And so I heard some of you kind of speak to that same issue. I think that that is probably just as a female wanting to be taken seriously, whether you're writing anything from romance especially, you have a tough jog ahead of you to try to be taken seriously in literature because of something like that. And of course then sometimes even from the other end, from the feminist end, sometimes if you are writing romance, some viewpoints within feminism does not like you to take that into account because they feel that immediately now you have put the woman into a submissive situation. So it's almost like you can't win one way or the other.
Same.
Yes.
Perfect. That's exactly how I've always felt about things. And it's not, I think, until you finally, as Carole had said, when you finally have written and written and written, that you get to a place where you're like, you know what, I feel comfortable with writing this character this way and writing this character this way. Probably one of the things that I'm always conscious of is that I am writing to archetypes, not stereotypes. And would any of you speak to that? Or even something, not necessarily that you've written, but things that you've read that have maybe influenced you one way or the other in a very positive way, or something that you said, I have to stay away from that because to me, this is someone that is stereotyping.
Okay. I don't like the trope of the strong, overly strong female character, as you were mentioning, Carole, that you have to have a character who has some flaw. And that goes for your male and female characters, but I think that there is a tendency to want your female characters to be super likable or to be very, very strong and almost perfect in order to make sure that we know that women can be those things. Well, of course they can, but you can't have them be so much more like Wonder Woman when your male characters are a little bit more human, and then the audience is still going to side with the male characters if they're the ones who seem more relatable. So why can't you make your female heroines more relatable while still having them be the heroine.
I had an interesting situation with a book that I just completed. It's going to be coming out soon. The publisher wanted me to add in the issue of domestic violence. It was basically the book was intended to be a woman who is sort of finding herself after she has lost her husband through experience with horses. It was sort of like a happy, sappy, sentimental horse book in many ways. And the publisher thought, no, there's not enough excitement there. There's not enough to keep the story going. Why don't we add in something with domestic violence where she's working with a woman who is in an abusive relationship? And I really balked at the idea of taking domestic violence and using that as a way of adding excitement to a book. I was really offended by that. But it actually, what I ended up doing was trying to write a realistic portrayal of what women who are in such relationships are like. I happen to have a friend who works in a women's shelter. She's able to give me some realistic ideas about the problems that women experience trying to get out of abusive relationships. And I found sort of a middle ground that way. But I found it really interesting that, again, that idea of, you have to have like the woman who is victimized, or you have to have the woman who is strong. You can't have the woman who's dealing with the gray area in between.
Right. And how do all of you handle a situation where you have a strong female character, but in order to make her strong, you still keep her feminine and not make her into a man?
Stop asking hard questions.
I've thought about these questions long and hard as I've been writing on my own. That's for certain.
I had that problem when I was writing a science fiction short story that I'm still trying to get published. But I ended up going into first person, and I actually started having to draw more from my own life. My full-time job is I'm a technical writer, and I've been in the high-tech field for 20 years, and I'm still a woman, but I deal with computers, I deal with very scientific things, and starting to pull out, okay, well, am I strong in this field and still, keep my femininity, I suppose, and using some of that, my own experience, that I was, to bring out this character, that she's a scientist, she's smart, she doesn't, take crap, but she's still a woman, and I think that was trying to bring out those real life experiences. It's difficult because you don't want them to be, male-like.
I understand it. I always had difficulty with clothing because you had this idea that, well, real women don't wear high heels. And of course, and I considered myself a real woman, and I thought, I wear heels all the time. I like to wear heels. I like to wear dresses. But I felt as though I couldn't write a female character that was dressing that way because it would come off as overly feminine, as almost vapid in that sense, because she was concerned about what she was wearing. It almost was in the beginning, as a woman writing, you almost feel like I can't have her concerned about her appearance whatsoever, because she's going to come off as though she has nothing inside her head and she's just very vain and so forth. Can't have her be falling in love, because then immediately it's going to be like, oh, she's willing to give up everything just for this guy. But then on the other hand, you couldn't have this woman that was essentially Xena that would go through and be able to just trounce all of these men in her life, because I thought, that is not me at all. So it was very difficult, and like Anne said, when you finally start getting into your own head to identify with these things, it's a little bit scary, because then immediately you assume that anytime you write something, especially if you happen to be in romance, that everyone assumes that's my fantasy and that's you just putting these things on paper.
Like seasoning from lives and other people's lives and your own life. But I think it's also just the little things of what people notice, and I think women can notice different things than men necessarily. Like you said, clothing, but also colors, also tastes and smells and things, different points of view. Just approaching it from that direction.
Well, but can I add something to that? That it's still a little bit dangerous to start saying that women tend toward this
That's
way
true.
and men tend toward this way, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, I was very scared to write the male protagonist point of view, and yet I felt like it went fine because it's not so much about writing a gender, it's about writing a character. And it's not so much about male or female personality traits, it's about the personality traits of that person.
Yeah.
And not to get way more philosophical, but in many ways, gender is kind of, it's a performance. It's kind of a constructed concept. It has biological realities, of course, but at the end of the day, you can have men be interested in certain things, women be interested in certain things. You know, I have strong female characters who wear skirts but carry a gun or do whatever, and men who are considered, when some people read them, considered a little bit weaker, you know, but that's their personality. It's not to do because of their gender.
The first time that I saw Alias and Sydney Bristow, to this day, I wrote an entire article about this once. I was amazed that they let her cry on screen. Because she was just had all of these moves, and she was doing, and they let her cry whenever she found her fiance dead, and that affected me because I was like, yes, because I would cry over something like that, and so many times we've been led to believe that if you cry as a woman, it is a weakness in that regard. And so to me, Sydney Bristow was like the perfect female character because she kept her feminine qualities, she kept her emotions, but she could do the things that needed to be done just as well as any of the male agents. Do any of you have any characters that you can remember that influenced you in that way?
I'm trying to think about.
I have killed the panel.
There's so many characters that are.
Do you mean from just general pop culture, or
Just in general.
Well, I mean, the quintessential modern day strong woman character is Buffy Summers.
I was wondering if somebody was going to bring up Buffy.
I was actually, when you're done,
Yeah,
I'll talk about Zoe
okay.
from Firefly.
I was going to
there you
say Dana Scully from
Yes.
X-Files.
Yes.
You know, where she was still very much the woman, but you know, she was a tough.
She was a scientist.
She was a scientist, and she was, in some ways, she was more grounded than Fox Mulder
Oh,
was.
definitely.
You know, she was the more logical one, and less, you know, where he was off to go do whatever based on his emotions.
That's true. That's true.
But in all three of these examples, they still do what Sydney did of being able to be emotional. Even Zoe, who's kind of...
Well, Zoe, you know, big, tough warrior woman, and then she's the one who's talking with her husband about, you know, when can we have kids?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And that never diminished her as a character, being a tough warrior woman, but also wanting to be a mother, so...
And in the flip side, Wash, who was her husband, this is from the show Firefly, I don't think that he came off as being weak in any way because he was the pilot of the ship.
Yeah.
But he knew that he did not have combat experience. He wasn't coming from a place where he had combat experience, but his wife did. So they understood that what their roles were, and maybe that's part of what we've been trying to speak to is the fact that they have different roles, and it doesn't necessarily depend on their gender, how those roles are going to play out.
Yeah, that's actually kind of true in my own real life, my home life. My father was a research chemist, so very science oriented. But it was my mother who knew how to use all the power tools and how to do all the woodworking and, you know, do a lot of things with the car because she had been an only child and that's what her father taught her. So there were these I learned both to cook and clean and, you know, hammer in nails and take apart things from my mother. You know, but I also do sort of the research-oriented things. And if you wanted emotional support, I went to my father. If you wanted, you know, sort of, okay, I have this problem. How do I logically solve it? I went to my mother. So.
Maureen McHugh, who is also a speculative fiction writer, had once said, and this impacted me, was on a feminist SF panel. She said, I don't understand why I can't pick up a book nowadays that's speculative fiction and have the female character have friends.
Yeah.
And that, I thought about that. In my own writing, I thought, nope, I have made her a complete loner, which often ends up being more of a male type of attribute. Have you encountered this yourselves?
Yes. there's a syndrome for that. There's a trope name for that. It's called Smurfette syndrome.
Smurfette
where you
syndrome.
have you're all male cast and you have one token woman.
Token female character.
And she might still be awesome, but she can't pass the Bechdel test because there's nobody else there, and by not having her have female friends, it feels like she's not trying to support other women, which I think it's good to actually inject into your work women supporting other women rather than tearing each other down. So.
Well, I mean, because look at the population of planet Earth is 50% male, 50% female, and why is that not represented in fiction of any type? You know, there's always the token, you know, multicultural characters. There's the token female character.
It's interesting. I will always remember Smurfette syndrome.
That's a great term.
That is a great term. Absolutely.
Now that I've thought about it, a lot of my characters tend to be loner characters, both male and female. It's interesting.
I know, me too. When you have to self-analyze some of your work, you're like,
now I want to go and change everything.
I think that may also be just simply a writer's perspective and not necessarily something to do with feminism. We tend to be loners in many ways. We deal in a profession that is very introspective. And
that's true.
I think that is sometimes just taking from our own experience.
I can see that, definitely. That's more of a reflection of the personality type rather than the gender in that regard. That's interesting. We'll do just a little wrap-up with each of you here. Hannah, we'll start. I'm sorry, Gribble. I know Hannah because we went to school together. Would you like to give us a little bit about your book and tell us where you can find it and do some promotion?
Okay, well, my most recent project, I was the editor of a science fiction and fantasy anthology, which Heidi has a story in, and you can find it on Amazon in both hard copy and ebook form.
I have a couple things out right now. I have, as Anne Kopchik, I have a fantasy short story in a anthology called Trust and Treachery, which can be found on Amazon. I also write as Anna Szabo romance. This is Close Quarter, and it is also available on Amazon. I have a book coming out called Takeover, which is also another romance that's coming out in August.
This is The Tapestry Baby. It's a book that takes a look at 8 different characters' perspectives, I think equally male and female, so maybe I achieved something there.
So, Anne, you can find it here at the book festival?
You can find it here at the book festival, online,
Okay, wonderful. Anne?
This is the piece that I'm mostly promoting this weekend, of my first full-length novel, and it's available here at the festival and also on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank all of you wonderful women for joining us, and thank you. This is one of our biggest audience for any of our panels today, so I'm very happy that you all came out to join us, and we will be back with you very soon.